This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I usually rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Sometimes I like to look at things from a different angle though, like today when we'll be looking at the most expensive green commons. Commons are usually thought of as the cheapest cards around, and while this is certainly true when looking at them as a whole, there are some commons out there that are going to set you back a more significant chunk of change. This is because these cards are in short supply and or in very heavy demand, so much so that these commons are actually kind of hard to find. Over the last few weeks, I've looked at the most expensive commons in various colors, and that's the theme we're continuing today. The prices I use for this video are the Card Kingdom near mint prices for the cheapest version of each of these commons. In other words, this is the least amount of money you can pay to obtain a copy of these cards in good condition. This also means no promos or special foil versions of cards were considered. Alright, without further ado, let's look at the 10 most expensive green commons in Magic. At number 10, it's DeGlamour, which costs about $250. For one generic and a green, it's an instant, and you choose target artifact or enchantment, and its owner shuffles it into their library. In other words, it's a naturalize, but one that puts it back in the library. That's better in many situations with all of the graveyard interaction these days, and in a pinch, you can even use it on your own thing if you want to draw it again. Back in the day, it saw some play in extended and vintage sideboards, but the 60 card format having the biggest impact on its price tag right now is Pauper, a format where only commons are legal. There are a few artifact and enchantment decks in the format that it's good against, but there's one heavily played card in particular that DeGlamour is great against, Rancor. Part of what makes that aura so good is that your opponent just keeps getting it back and slapping it on their creatures. DeGlamour gives you a way to deal with Rancor that prevents this from ever happening. So, heavy demand in Pauper, combined with the fact that the only time this was printed was in 2008's Morningtide, means that this is one of the most expensive green commons in Magic. At number 9, it's Skyshroud Claim, which costs $2.79. For 3 generic and a green, this sorcery searches up 2 forests and puts them onto the battlefield. Then you shuffle. We see 4-mana cards that grab 2 lands a lot, but this is arguably the best version of that effect. Why? Well, first, it can grab non-basics as long as they have the forest type, and second, the lands you grab actually enter the battlefield untapped. You basically end up paying 2 mana to cast Claim, and that's kind of nuts. Somewhat surprisingly, it has never seen success in 60 card formats. There just weren't viable ramp decks in block or standard, even with Skyshroud Claim in the mix. However, Skyshroud Claim is highly sought after by Commander players. That's a format where you frequently have multiple non-basics with the forest type in your deck, so the fixing and ramp the Claim provides is very serious. This means anyone playing a green ramp commander should be playing it, and anyone playing green at all should consider running Skyshroud Claim. Right now, almost 200,000 decks in EDHREC are using it. That's more than 10% of all the green decks in the database. It's also the card on the list that is the most heavily played in Commander by far. That demand is more than enough to drive up the price on the Claim, since it's only been printed a single time in a standard release set, and that was almost a quarter century ago. It has been reprinted in sets like Battle Bond and Commander Masters, which have certainly added to the card's supply, but not enough for it to stop being one of the most expensive green commons in Magic. At number 8, it's Slime Against Humanity, which costs about $3. For 2 generic and a green, this sorcery creates a 0/0 green ooze token with trample, and then you put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is 2, plus the total number of cards you own in exile and in your graveyard that are oozes, or named Slime Against Humanity. So the baseline is that you get a 3-mana 2/2 with trample, and the more copies of this card or oozes you have around, the bigger your tokens get. And it's pretty easy to have a ton of copies of this around, because a deck can have any number of copies of Slime Against Humanity. As we learned when we looked at Rat Colony in the list and the most expensive black commons, turning off normal deck building rules is important in determining the cost of this card, since it means that the demand for it is naturally going to be higher than it would be for a card with the normal restrictions to 1 per deck in Commander or 4 per deck in 60 card formats. This is because people wanting to build decks around this thing are going to need a whole heck of a lot of them. It hasn't seen any play in 60 card formats, and compared to most of the cards on the list, it isn't that heavily played in Commander either. Fewer than 6,000 decks are using it on EDHREC, but if we assume those decks are running 40 copies each of Slime Against Humanity, That's equal to the demand of a singleton card that appears in 240,000 decks on EDHREC. So, that's why Slime Against Humanity manages to have a $3 price tag. At number 7, it's Moment's Peace, which costs about $3. For 2 generic and a green, this instant prevents all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, and it has flashback for 2 generic and a green, which means you can cast it from the graveyard for that cost and then exile it. In other words, this is a fog that can do the fog thing twice. That's pretty nice, since in general, decks running fogs are pretty interested in getting that effect more than once, so they can make the game go long and set up their win condition. For example, it's been used in block and extended ramp decks using things like Mirari's Wake or Heartbeat of Spring. Those decks need time to get to the requisite lands in play to make a ton of mana, and Moment's Peace gave them that time. The 60-card format having the biggest impact on its price right now, though, is Pauper, a format where only commons are legal. That format has a powerful Turbo Fog deck that is built around fogging, shuffling cards back into your library from the graveyard, and gaining tons of life with Weather the Storm, while using Stream of Thought to keep yourself from getting milled out while milling the opponent. Commander demand for Moment's Peace is moderate at best, with around 7,200 decks in EDHREC using it. There's only one normal printing of Moment's Peace out there, and it's from 2001. Since then, it's only received a Secret Lair reprint, so heavy demand in Pauper and light demand in Commander is enough to drive this common's price right up. At number 6, it's Golden Bear, which costs $3.29. For 3 generic and a green, it's a 4/3 creature, and yeah, that's it. As you can imagine, no one plays this in 60-card formats or Commander because a vanilla 4-mana 4/3 just doesn't move the needle in any format. Well, I say that, but Ayula Commander players are desperate enough for bears that Golden Bear actually sees play in 3,633 decks in EDHREC, which is a lot more than your typical vanilla creature. But still, how does this cost $3.29? Well, because it's from Portal, Second Age. Portal 3 Kingdoms makes regular appearances on most expensive lists. We'll be seeing some cards from it higher on this list. And while Portal Second Age isn't quite that rare, it has a similar story. Portal and Portal Second Age were sets released with the intention of being on-ramps for new Magic players. These were starter products that contained super simple cards, like Golden Bear. The set didn't even have any instants, enchantments, or artifacts. When I was a kid, the first Portal was actually one of the ways I learned the game. Anyway, these sets had fairly limited print runs, so the commons from the set aren't always easy to find, thus Golden Bear's tiny bit of demand in Commander is more than enough to make it cost $3.29. At number 5, it's Woodland Mystic, which costs about $5. For 1 generic and a green, it's a 1/1, and it can tap for green mana. And yeah, it's a second straight card with a high price that isn't particularly impressive, though the Mystic is obviously better than Golden Bear. Even Alana War Elves that cost twice as much is still a pretty solid card. Anyway, the story behind the Mystic's price tag is actually fairly reminiscent to the Golden Bear story. While Woodland Mystic looks like it's from M20, and you might think you can get one just by opening packs from that set, you actually can't. You can see that from its weird set number, which appears as 344 out of 280. It has that set number because it was an exclusive card for the M20 Welcome deck, which, like Portal Second Age, was an introductory way for new players to play Magic. These were simplified decks that were good for teaching new players the game, and they contained a few exclusive cards. So far, that's the one and only way you can get Woodland Mystic, so the price on the card is surprisingly high, especially for a card that's never seen play in 60-card formats and sees play in fewer than 1,000 decks on EDHREC. At number 4, it's Avoid Fate, which costs about $5. For 1 green mana, this instant counters an instant or aura spell that targets a permanent you control. That's right, it's a green counterspell. And sure, it's kind of specific, but one of the things you most like to do in green decks is protect your big ol' creatures from removal, and this can do the job in many cases. Despite being fairly unique, Avoid Fate has never seen play in 60-card formats, and there's not big demand for it in Commander either. So this is our 3rd consecutive card where rarity is the main factor in driving up its price. It's pretty interesting there's so much of that on this list, because there's been a lot less of it in the videos that look at the most expensive commons in other colors, where only 1 or 2 cards on the list get there on rarity alone. Anyway, Avoid Fate was originally printed way back in 1994's Legends, and since then, the only reprint it has received was as a Time Spiral Time-Shifted card. Time Shifted was Magic's very first bonus sheet, which is a subset of cards that can appear in booster packs of a main set. There were 121 time-shifted cards, and with only one of them appearing in each pack, this made them fairly rare, and when a card's only been printed in 1994 and on a bonus sheet from 2006, it's going to be in short supply. And number 3, it's Mobilize, which costs about $6.50. For 1 green mana, it's a sorcery that untaps all of your creatures. This is yet another card that gets here largely as a result of being rare. It's not widely played in Commander and has never been played in 60-card formats, but its only printing came in the first Portal set, which came out in 1997. A lot of the cards in Portal are simplified versions of cards that already existed when the set was released, and Mobilize is Vitalize, but it's a sorcery instead of an instant. That said, these are the only 2 green cards with this effect, and it can be pretty nice in the right deck, like Inga and Isaka or Seton. Still, it doesn't see much play in EDH. At number 2, it's Priest of Titania, the first card in several slots to make the list based at least partly on its own merit, and not just because it's hard to find. The Priest is 1 generic and a green for a 1/1, and you can tap it to add a green mana for each elf on the battlefield. That means it taps for 1 green all on its own, like Woodland Mystic who we saw earlier, but it can also add insane amounts of mana if you have a bunch of elves in play, and of course if you're playing this card, it's because you have tons of elves. It saw play in elf decks in Standard way back in 2000. This deck, which also had Rofellos and Gaia's Cradle, could produce insane amounts of mana, and then you could sink it all into Masticore's ping ability, effectively creating a one-sided Wrath. She's also found success in Legacy elf decks, which look to cast Glimpse of Nature and rip through the whole library by casting elf after elf in a single turn. One of the best ways to accomplish this is with the Priest, who can untap over and over with Wirewood Symbiotes. Of all the 60-card formats right now, though, Pauper is the one where the demand is the highest. Having a card that can tap for this much mana in that format is a huge advantage, as most commons just aren't capable of this level of mana output, and of course she's played in elf decks in the format. Elves are, of course, also quite popular in EDH, and she sees play in almost 80,000 decks on EDHREC. Of all the cards on the list, she is by far the most reprinted. You can get her from Urza Saga, Commander 2014, Commander Anthology, and the upcoming Modern Horizons 3. Apart from Urza Saga, none of those are regular releases, and the reprints have all come at uncommon, but the sheer quantity of reprints is pretty insane for a card that costs $7. That just goes to show you how heavy the demand is for Priest of Titania right now. And at number 1, it's the 2 most expensive green commons from Portal 3 Kingdoms, the $24 Forest Bear and Zodiac Rooster, which cost about $8.50. These would have been number 1 and 2 if I gave them their own spots on the list. I do want to mention that none of these are actually the most expensive green common in Portal 3 Kingdoms. That would actually be 3 Visits, which is a sorcery for 1 generic and a green that gets a forest and puts it into play untapped. Like Skyshroud Claim, it's highly sought after by Commander players, and largely for the same reasons. If you want the Portal 3 Kingdom versions of that card, it's going to cost you $44, but it's been reprinted a ton lately, and you can get a copy of it for $2.29 right now, so it didn't make the list. Anyway, let's talk about the 2 cards that did make the list from Portal 3 Kingdoms. As you've probably guessed by now, these 2 are here because they're hard to find. Portal 3 Kingdoms is the rarest of all the Portal sets, and one of the rarest sets in all of Magic, only behind the game's earliest releases. This is because it has a very limited release, and only in Asian markets. So the commons in the set that have never been reprinted have high price tags, even when they aren't particularly good, and these definitely aren't. They're just underwhelming creatures. Forest Bear is the Portal 3 Kingdoms version of Grizzly Bear, and Zodiac Rooster costs 1 generic and a green for a 2/1 with Planeswalk. Neither are completely unplayable, but you also don't have a reason to play them in any format either, and yet, they're still the 2 most expensive green commons in Magic. So, those are the most expensive green commons in Magic. If you want to own any of these not-so-common commons, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at the most expensive cards in the game, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.